My name is Sarah, and out of all the disturbing experiences shared by independent researchers and security consultants, the most terrifying encounters are often the ones where you realize that a casual, completely polite gesture toward an ordinary acquaintance can be twisted into a dangerous obsession. This third case file does not come from a corporate investigator's logs, but from the raw, first-hand account of a young woman who found herself trapped in the crosshairs of a deeply unstable mind. It serves as a chilling reminder that predators do not always lurk in dark alleys. Sometimes, they are the quiet, unassuming people we pass in our daily lives who interpret basic human kindness as an open invitation to control our existence. To ensure her complete safety and absolute legal anonymity, I will present this account using the pseudonym of Chloe. Chloe was a 22-year-old university student who lived in a modest, closely knit suburban neighborhood. To help finance her education, cover her textbooks, and pay her monthly apartment utilities, she worked part-time as a customer service associate at a large, bustling home improvement and retail hardware store located near the edge of the city. Chloe was a naturally warm, empathetic, and incredibly polite individual. Her job required her to assist hundreds of customers every single day, helping them locate items, processing exchanges, and answering inquiries with a professional, cheerful demeanor. To Chloe, being kind and helpful was simply a standard requirement of her job and a reflection of her personal values. She never could have imagined that this very kindness would attract a dark, relentless shadow into her life. The ordeal began on a mundane Thursday afternoon during her regular shift at the customer service desk. A customer approached her counter seeking assistance with a complex product return. The man, whom she later learned was named Wade, appeared to be in his early 30s, dressed in ordinary, slightly unkempt civilian clothing. From the very beginning of the transaction, Wade displayed an unusual level of social awkwardness and intense nervousness. His hands trembled slightly as he handed over his receipt, and he struggled to maintain direct eye contact, stammering through his explanation. Sensing his extreme discomfort, Chloe did what she always did for any customer in distress. She offered a warm, reassuring smile, spoke to him in an exceptionally gentle, patient tone, and spent an extra 10 minutes navigating the store's bureaucratic system to ensure his return was processed smoothly, and he received his full refund. Wade seemed incredibly grateful, thanking her repeatedly before leaving the premises. Chloe thought nothing more of the encounter, categorizing it as just another routine interaction in a long, exhausting workday. But to a deeply unstable mind, ordinary professional courtesy can be a dangerous spark. Wade did not see a helpful retail employee. In his twisted perception, he saw a profound, personal connection. A few days later, Wade returned to the store. He didn't have any items to purchase or return. Instead, he walked directly to the customer service desk, waited until the line cleared, and approached Chloe. He looked noticeably more groomed than before, but the intense, nervous energy remained. He placed a small, neatly wrapped box on the counter, pushed it toward her, and stammered that he wanted to thank her properly for her incredible kindness during his previous visit. Chloe felt an immediate wave of professional discomfort. Company policy strictly prohibited employees from accepting personal gifts or tips from customers. She politely but firmly declined the package, offering a forced smile and explaining, "Thank you so much, sir, but I cannot accept this. I was just doing my job, and I treat every customer the exact same way." Wade's face fell instantly, his expression shifting from eager anticipation to a dark, sullen rejection. He didn't argue. He simply picked up the box, turned on his heel, and walked out of the store without saying another word. Chloe felt a slight prickle of unease in her stomach, but she quickly dismissed it, hoping that her clear, professional boundary had put an end to the awkward situation. She was terribly wrong. Her rejection had not deterred Wade. It had simply caused his obsession to evolve from an overt approach into a covert, calculated stalking campaign. Over the next 3 weeks, Wade became a permanent, terrifying fixture in Chloe's daily environment. He stopped approaching her counter, realizing that she would reject his advances, but he began lurking inside the store for hours at a time. Every single time Chloe looked up from her computer screen or walked down the retail aisles to restock shelves, she would spot Wade standing a short distance away. He would stand perfectly still behind a display of power tools or blend into the crowd near the building materials section, his eyes locked onto her with a rigid, completely unblinking intensity. He would watch her talk to colleagues, monitor her interactions with other customers, and track her movements across the sales floor. When Chloe informed her store manager about the persistent harassment, the corporate response was frustratingly limited. The manager walked the floor and observed Wade, but because Wade was technically a member of the public standing in a public retail space, wasn't actively destroying property, and hadn't made an explicit physical threat or verbal scene, the store management felt they lacked the immediate legal authority to forcefully ban him from the premises. They simply advised Chloe to stay in brightly lit areas and promised to have the store security guard keep an eye on her desk. The isolation of the situation pushed Chloe into a state of high, constant anxiety. But the true horror of the situation broke through when she realized that Wade's surveillance was no longer confined to her workplace. He had actively followed her home, learning her personal schedules, her residential address, and the intimate details of her life outside the retail store. One evening, after finishing a late-night closing shift at 10:00 p.m., Chloe drove back to her suburban apartment complex. As she walked from her parked vehicle toward the main entrance of her building, she caught a sudden flash of movement near the dark perimeter fence. Standing under the shadow of a large tree, completely still in the cold night air, was the distinct silhouette of Wade. He had followed her vehicle in the dark, tracking her to her sanctuary. From that night onward, Chloe's life transformed into a living nightmare. The terrifying realization that her privacy had been completely compromised inside her own home left her unable to sleep or eat. She kept her blinds tightly drawn, threw every lock on her doors, and lived in a perpetual state of hypervigilance. Wade grew bolder with every passing day, moving his stalking campaign into a terrifying digital and physical space. Chloe began noticing a stranger, a completely different man holding a camera, standing across the street from her apartment building during the day, pointing a lens toward her windows. She realized with pure dread that Wade was starting to deploy resources to keep her under an absolute, round-the-clock panopticon. She felt completely hunted, isolated, and helpless, realizing that the predator was quietly drawing a net around her life, waiting for the perfect moment to close the trap. The situation escalated to a breaking point during a bright weekend afternoon, proving that a predator's obsession does not wait for the cover of darkness. Chloe had a close childhood friend named Paul, a dependable, athletic young man who had been a constant source of support throughout her life. Knowing the immense psychological distress Chloe was under due to Wade's relentless stalking, Paul had made it a habit to check on her frequently, often driving over to her apartment complex to ensure she wasn't alone. On that specific afternoon, Paul had parked his car in the residential lot and walked up to Chloe's apartment. He spent a few hours sitting with her, offering a comforting distraction from her anxiety. Realizing that her kitchen pantry was entirely empty because she had been too terrified to go grocery shopping alone, Paul generously offered to drive her to the local supermarket. Grateful for the protective company, Chloe agreed, laced up her shoes, and walked out of the building by his side. The trip to the supermarket passed without incident, and for a brief moment, the familiar presence of a trusted friend allowed Chloe to feel a temporary sense of normalcy. But the terrifying illusion was shattered the exact moment they returned to the apartment complex. Paul pulled his car into a parking space, turned off the engine, and both of them stepped out of the vehicle, carrying the plastic grocery bags toward the main stairwell. Suddenly, a harsh, aggressive voice shattered the quiet afternoon air. "So this is why you wouldn't accept my gift. This is the guy you've been hiding from me." Chloe froze in absolute horror, her heart dropping into her stomach. She turned around, and there, stepping out from behind a large delivery van parked in the lot, was Wade. His face was twisted into a mask of pure, unhinged rage, his eyes bloodshot and his clothing messy. He was trembling violently, his hands clenched into tight fists as he marched directly toward them, completely ignoring the public setting. Before Chloe could even process his sudden presence, Wade focused his fury entirely on Paul. He stepped into Paul's personal space, pointing a finger aggressively at his chest, screaming a torrent of wild, incoherent accusations. He claimed that Paul was interfering in a private relationship, shouting that Chloe belonged to him, and that Paul was destroying the beautiful connection they had built at the hardware store. Paul did not hesitate or flinch. Recognizing the immediate physical danger Chloe was in, he instinctively stepped in front of her, using his broad frame as a solid shield to completely block Wade from reaching her. Paul dropped the grocery bags onto the asphalt, squared his shoulders, and stood his ground, looking directly into Wade's frantic eyes. "You need to back off right now," Paul said, his voice dropping into a low, fiercely calm and authoritative tone that carried an implicit warning. "Get away from her, get in your car, and leave this property immediately, or this is going to end badly for you." Wade, despite his explosive rage, was a coward at heart. He was used to targeting a vulnerable, isolated young woman from the safety of the shadows. Faced with the sudden, imposing physical defiance of an athletic young man who refused to back down, Wade's confidence began to rapidly crumble. He stopped advancing, his body language shifting from aggressive confrontation to nervous hesitation. He began to slowly back away, pointing a shaking finger at both of them, uttering wild, desperate verbal threats. "You think you've won?" Wade hissed, his voice cracking with malice. "This isn't over. You'll regret this, both of you. You can't keep her protected forever." The moment Wade began his retreat, Paul grabbed Chloe's arm and guided her back toward his vehicle. The second Chloe was safely locked inside the passenger seat, her hands shaking so violently that she could barely hold her smartphone. She dialed the emergency number for the local police department. In a frantic, breathless rush, she explained the entire confrontation, informing the dispatcher that an unstable stalker had physically confronted her and was actively threatening her life in her parking lot. Within 15 minutes, 2 marked police cruisers pulled into the apartment complex with their lights flashing. The officers took detailed statements from both Chloe and Paul, documenting the verbal threats and Wade's description. However, because Wade had already fled the scene before the sirens arrived, and because the initial interaction was a classic case of conflicting verbal accounts with no third-party witnesses or physical damage, the officers explained that they couldn't make an immediate arrest. But the true breakthrough in the case, the legal miracle that ultimately saved Chloe from her tormentor, arrived from the most unexpected source imaginable. Unbeknownst to Chloe, the stranger she had spotted across the street pointing a camera at her apartment window was indeed a professional, licensed private investigator. As it turned out, Wade had used his savings to hire this investigator under entirely fraudulent pretenses. Wade had lied to the investigator, spinning a complex, fabricated narrative claiming that Chloe was his long-term fiancée who had suddenly gone missing or was being held against her will by an abusive third party. Wade had paid the private eye to track her movements and gather data to help him rescue her. However, professional private investigators are trained to analyze human behavior and verify facts. As the hired investigator conducted his secret surveillance over those weeks, he quickly realized that something was deeply wrong with the assignment. He observed Chloe's daily routines, noted her visible fear when looking out her windows, and saw absolutely no evidence of any relationship, past or present, with a man named Wade. The investigator began to suspect that he was being illegally weaponized as a tool for a dangerous stalker's obsession. When the local police department officially contacted the investigator using the surveillance logs and descriptions Chloe provided, The investigator did not hesitate to cooperate. He walked into the police station and laid out his entire file on the table. He explicitly told the detectives that during his brief interaction with Wade, he had realized the man was deeply unstable, highly dangerous, and suffering from severe, unhinged delusions. The investigator revealed that he had actually terminated his contract with Wade days prior and had explicitly warned him to stay far away from the young woman. The professional testimony of a licensed private investigator changed the entire legal landscape. It provided the objective, undeniable third-party proof the authorities needed, corroborating Chloe's claims of a calculated multi-week stalking campaign. Armed with this comprehensive file, Chloe's attorney walked into a courtroom, and a judge immediately issued a strict, permanent restraining order against Wade, carrying severe criminal penalties if violated. That legal boundary proved to be the definitive end of the nightmare. Not long after the restraining order was officially served, Wade completely vanished from the grid. Realizing that his legal loophole had been permanently closed and that the police were actively monitoring his actions, he deleted his entire digital footprint, deactivated his social media accounts, quit his local employment, and moved out of the city entirely. Years have passed since that terrifying confrontation in the parking lot, and Chloe has never seen or heard from Wade again. But the psychological impact of that intense ordeal remains a lingering shadow in her mind. She has since completed her university degree and moved to a completely different state, but she remains hyper-aware of her surroundings, never forgetting how easily a simple, professional smile toward an ordinary stranger was twisted into a dangerous, life-threatening trap. She looks back on that weekend afternoon with a deep sense of profound gratitude, knowing with absolute certainty that if her friend Paul hadn't been standing by her side to face the predator, the outcome of that day would have been a terrible, unspeakable tragedy.